Here today to help us understand how civil discussions can be held and go forward, we're really pleased to welcome Susan Sgorbati and Alisa del Tufo, who are here with us today. Alisa teaches Restorative Justice Practices at the Center for Advancement of Public Action at Bennington College. Alisa, great to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
And also Susan Sgorbati is the director of the Center for Advancement of Public Action at Bennington College, or CAPA, as it's often referred to. She's also a professional mediator and educator whose creative research has led to collaborations across disciplines and borders on both as an artist and a driver of social change. So, ladies, great to have you with us today. And I just thought to kind of help us get started, we could have you both talk to us a little bit about sort of drawing on your own experiences in mediation. What are some of your suggestions or thoughts or ideas on how to engage with people who may not share the same views as you, again, whether or not they're political or social or whatever? Is there a good starting point to bear in mind when you begin to feel yourself entering a conversation with someone who might be not quite on the same page as you are about whatever the subject matter might turn out to be?
Thank you, Andrew. So one of the things that I think about this topic, which is a really important topic, I think particularly right now, at this particular moment in history, where a lot of things I feel like have really come to the surface in ways that people really tangibly feel, like climate change, like economic inequity, and people struggling, right, for food, for housing, while they see other people making tons of money, right, even during the pandemic. Racial justice, right, injustice, that people striving for racial justice, right, historically. And then a pandemic hits, and there's all of this fear. And I would say that a lot of conflict, particularly conflict that gets out of control, is based on fear. And a lot of times people will turn fear into anger and rage. And that's their only way of coping. So the reason I bring this up is because the approach of how you get up in the morning and decide to interact with people and have relationships is actually important. And I always think about it as that humans want some basic things in relationships. They want safety, they want connection, and they want meaning. And so that may not be conscious, but you can kind of sense it and feel it if those things aren't present. And particularly if you don't, if you know people really well, you may have all kinds of complicated ways of having safety or meaning or connection that are not even conscious, right, that are complicated. But certainly with strangers, you may not at all, it's conscious. But if you get up every morning with the intention that you want to build relationships, then you're approaching the world in a certain way and you're doing a practice. And I think Alisa will talk more about a particular kind of practice that's very intentional. So if you approach the world that way and you get up every morning and make that commitment, then when you get involved with, which we're all day long, negotiating with people, interacting with people, you're bringing that approach in the first place. And then you can start to do some very tangible skills like active listening and other things that we can talk about.
I couldn't agree with Susan more. I think that the fear that she's talking about is almost to the level of kind of a collective trauma that everybody that I know experiences these days, and I think it's fed by social media. We're being trained to hate each other. We're being prodded to disagree with one another through this enormous, I'm not saying it's all intentional, but it's the way it works feeds one of the tendencies that exists in human beings, which is to want to separate yourself from other people, want to define yourself in, sort of against how other people think and act. And I have done a lifetime's work in this sort of arena. And one of the things you said that I think is really important is that these experiences, these feelings people have of fear, worry, are translated immediately these days into anger, because that's a feeling that we're being told is, I mean, it is okay to be angry. I'm not trying to say it's not, but I think that we're that as a society we're being given an enormous amount of permission to not only be angry but to express that anger in some very toxic ways with other people, and that's now kind of okay, and that's just feeding people's sense that they're different from other people, and that not only are they different, but that the other is wrong. You know, we're othering so many people these days. They're not like us. They don't feel the same way we do. They don't have the same values. They don't go to the same faith community as we do. They don't eat the same food as we do. They don't want to get vaccinated. Whatever the issue is, we're able to sort of say we're not them. And by doing that, we turn them a little bit into an enemy. And when you turn someone into an enemy, it's a lot easier to be hostile to them.
What's different today than what we had experienced, let's say, in the mid-1960s, where we had the threat of nuclear war, the threat, not the threat, but the Vietnam War, major civil rights issues, and the beginning of inflation, and obviously very much political unrest with the assassination of the president, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and then all that happened in Chicago in 1968. You mentioned social media. Is social media and I'll leave it up to you to answer.
Well, I think social media is sort of the ground in which we all exist on now, but I think that the fact that we know so much, I sort of feel like human beings have a certain tolerance level for crisis, and we're on a 24-hour news cycle, right? You cannot open your computer without seeing a starving child, a person of color being killed by a police officer. These things have always existed. I understand that, and people of conscience have tried to make a difference in those things. But the fact that we are bombarded every single minute of every single day that we open our phone or computer or television, and even entertainment is now completely overrun with violence and kind of dystopian ideas of the future, that I just think that has really changed our kind of internal chemistry in some ways. That's a little hard to describe without going into like a whole psychological analysis, sociological analysis. But I think that combined with this quick response time that's expected through a social media, the way that we communicate now, has kind of created a perfect storm. I do think that. Plus, our political leaders have not helped, right? I mean, they have definitely lowered the bar for relationship, the quality of our relationships, I think. So,
because the news back in the 60s, we didn't have all the channels like you have today, but we were getting it. Every Thursday, you got the war news from Vietnam.
Sure. Number of dead bodies.
We saw on live TV the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald.
That's right.
So, was there a different way in which we were able to deal with those issues?
Yes, all through history, humans have had to deal with horrible things and crises, but in our country, during that period of Vietnam, we were all watching it together. I mean, for the most part, there were 3 main channels. We might have had we had different, political affiliations still, Democratic, Republican, Independent, but now, from what I understand from, like Pew Research Group, people we are very enclosed in our bubbles for how we get information now. So there are people who only get their information from this cable channel, or only get their information from this cable channel, or only follow it on Facebook in certain kind of, pieces of that they go on to. So we are segregating ourselves, whether it's intentional or not, because we don't want to really open ourselves. As Alisa said, maybe it's just too much information. But we really are funneling ourselves into different tribes. And so then, if we're only getting the information that our group is accustomed to, we come out of that and meet somebody else who's getting it from a totally different place. We have very different perspectives on the same event, right? Because it's not the same people.
Walter Cronkite has not like coached us in how to think and feel about
Well, if that is
thing.
the case, and I don't disagree with you, then as professionals and professors, what would you say people should do differently? Would it be? I'll use myself as an example. If I'm getting my news from one source, are you suggesting, or should you suggest, that I get it from two sources, and this goes to get on the other side of the argument. I'm just, I'll hear more from you.
Well, I think the other thing I wanted to throw into the mix is trust. I think that in the 60s, even though there was an erosion of trust and the generation that was coming, into young adulthood at that time was very mistrustful of the government. That's kind of what it was all about. I think that is even more of the case now. And talking about Pew, I mean, there are global studies that show that people's trust in their government is lower than it's ever been, and that's true in this country as well. So we don't feel held in a safe environment, right? Like we feel like it's all on me, and like you're saying, my tribe for my self-preservation. I think there's a real sense of competition, like that we're not in this together, that it's my group against your group.
Yeah, I don't think we have that sense of the public good.
Good, yeah.
I mean, not that it was always complicated to begin with, what that meant in this country, but I think there was some idea that was a goal, and I'm not sure that we see the public good now as people who disagree with us. We only see it as people who agree with us. And I mean, just a quick example that I had literally last week was I was at a gas station pumping gas, and I had a mask on, and this older man pulled up in the pump across from me and didn't have a mask on. Fine, we were outside. But he started getting angry and grumbling, not at me, but just at the world for the prices are too high, they wouldn't pass the pipeline, it's all Biden's fault, it's all everybody's fault, and how come there's not plenty of oil? And I was like, okay, so I'm here, we're this far apart, I could either engage or I can go, there's no way, right? And I thought, no, because this practice, I'm trying to practice really being open and engaging somebody who's really different from me. Now, if he had been violent, I don't know. Because I think that does cross a line to what people are promoting violence or not. But if we're living in a democracy and you hope that this is a debate of different views, I thought, okay, he's got a different view. He doesn't seem violent to me. I'm going to engage him. So I looked across the gas pump and I said, so you're really upset about the oil? And he goes, yes, I am. And I said, well, we're going to have to figure something out soon because it's not a renewable energy source. It's going to run out. And what are we going to do after that? And he kind of looked at me and he's like, well, all right, okay, I can see that. But until we get to that point, don't you think we should be having the oil and the gas? And I was like, well, I think we have to talk about it more, It's a lot more complicated than that. Anyway, so we got into a conversation, and then at the end, we got our gas. He said, have a nice day. It was a great interchange. So anyway, just a little bit of I didn't already say he's a supporter of somebody I don't agree with. He's not wearing a mask, right? So anyway, it's just interesting. Yeah.
In restorative practices, one of the sort of lines, things that we say all the time is that we have to learn how to respond rather than react. because we're very quick to react. Like this kind of situation is a really perfect example, because it's the kind of thing that could happen 5 times a day, every day. So what happens if you respond to someone rather than reacting to someone? You're not it's not bouncing off you like, ricocheting off a wall. You're actually hearing what they have to say. And what you said was simple and perfect. It's like, wow, I'm sorry you feel so upset, but what are we going to do about it? This is actually a problem. What do you think we should do about it? And often people hear something they don't like, they get their hackles up for all sorts of good reasons. I'm not saying there aren't good reasons. But instead of responding with a kind of open, like, wow, why do you feel that way? Or I never thought of it that way, tell me more. Or something that's inviting them to feel like we're both human beings, right? You react like, shut up, I can't believe you're talking like that, my children are not going to have a future, whatever. That might be a typical response. That would be a reaction. Then that person is going to go, they're going to react back to you. And it's just going to become this little nuclear, experience where nobody moves forward. Everybody moves into their corners and puts up their dukes, and they're fighting it out, and no one evolves to the next stage, which might be maybe the dude went home and thought, maybe I should think about this more. Maybe I should get a fuel pump. Maybe who knows what he thought. But it was an interaction that didn't create more bad energy in the world and didn't make him feel like, oh, she's a bleeding liberal. I hate those people. They're so impractical, right? And she didn't walk away thinking, well, he's a redneck who only believes that there's an unending supply of fuel for everybody and not care about the future of the world. That's not how they ended that conversation. And that's, given what we're up against, that's positive, right? That's a positive thing.
Yeah.
You're giving me a perfect segue into a point I wanted to ask you both about. I'm currently reading a book by Amanda Ripley called High Conflict, and it kind of speaks to a lot of those kind of issues. Actually, this program kind of made me pull it off the library and grab it. And one of the points she makes repeatedly in the book is the importance of listening. And not just listening as, you might be sitting here,
Right.
but, hearing and processing what the other person is saying. It's not okay just to kind of sit there and go, yeah, all right. But and an interesting technique is something she calls looping, which I guess is to actually repeat back to the person you're talking to. So if I understand you correctly, this is what you're getting across, right? And whether or not you've repeated it back accurately or not is almost secondary to the fact that, oh, this person's actually listening to me. And
right,
my
and they
opinion
may
means
say,
something.
"Oh no, what I meant was," or they'll take it to the next sort of level of depth, because what someone says initially, there's always more behind it. And so you could call it deep listening or generous listening or curious listening, but I think it's a really important. It's not that hard a skill to learn, right? I mean, we can all learn that line, but the question is, can we really achieve it? As a listener, can we suspend our own reaction to the person and actually listen and get a little bit under the surface? Because often, when you get under that first advertisement of who they are, like I'm advertising that I'm an athlete, I'm advertising that I'm rich, I'm advertising that I'm right wing, whatever it is, right? I'm advertising I'm a feminist, I'm advertising I'm a racial justice person. Underneath that first, kind of image that we're projecting is a lot more depth and a lot more nuance. And if we're reacting to the advertising, we're not really seeing the person for who they are, and we're not really understanding what they have to share with us. And
And this kind of active listening is fundamental to resolving conflicts and to kind of creating the kind of relationships I think that you want this program to kind of inform. And I think another study I remember early on when I was studying conflict resolution was that most of us listen to the first like 5 to 7 words that somebody's saying, and then we fill in the script from our previous thoughts about things. So to practice this deep or active listening, again, you have to practice intentionally allowing yourself to go into a blank slate and receiving what the other person is saying to you, not you taking any of yourself and imposing it on what you're interpreting, but trying to really allow yourself to come back and listen to what is coming to you. And then part of that reframing that you talked about is a way to communicate to the other person, oh, they were paying attention. They actually were paying attention. Because then I can hear it and I can actually correct it and say, no, that isn't what I actually said. Because already we're interrupting most of the time each other and moving on from the ability to stop and actually listen to each other. And it's a really powerful, like if you practice it, any of us during the day, and just go, okay, I'm going to practice this with the next person I'm with. You actually feel differently. Like you can feel it in yourself, that you are doing something different in the way that you're paying attention that you are doing probably most of all day long.
Yeah, we do a little exercise as I mentioned earlier, I do oral histories as well as restorative justice. And one of the exercises that crosses both fields is just what Susan's saying. You take a walk with someone, 5 minutes one direction, and one person speaks the entire time. There's usually a question, it could be as simple as, how are you feeling today? Or what happened over the weekend or whatever, but some question. On the way out, one person speaks. On the way back, and the other person just listens the entire time. On the way back, the other person speaks and the other person listens. When they sit down together, they kind of reflect on what they heard from that person say. It's a really simple thing. It's really effective because it teaches both parties what speaking is like when someone is actually actively listening, and it teaches what active listening can be like and where we might need to practice that a little bit more. So,
about listening, I recall back in the 60s, and I'm just trying to see, do you draw on history, how we got through issues? For example, I remember being with the National Council of Churches as one of the auditors down in New York when I was with Arthur Anderson, my days back then. And they had a major conflict with their Southern members over civil rights. If you were an Episcopal in New York, and if you were black, you couldn't get into a white Episcopal church in Mississippi. And then, so the church had conflict. And I was at the meetings just as a young auditor. I had no say. But I was listening to how the bishops and the elder states people of the church were trying to resolve this split, because it was going to split, and it did split a few of the groups. But they also brought in, it's not just a question of listening, it's a question of culture. Our culture doesn't allow us, that's what they, and obviously we got over that. But so I just want to see, do you draw on history, how we got through things?
You have to, because we bring that all with us, don't we? I mean, it's like we don't leave it at the door, even though we might try to leave some parts of it at the door. But if you don't allow that to be part of the conversation, you're not kind of bringing your full self to the process. And the thing is that we all have histories, some good, some bad, some hard, some easy, some privilege. We all have biases, right? They're not going to go away. We have to learn to identify them and be honest about them, really. I mean, because we are who we are, right? I mean, we have a certain mother and father, and we were born in a certain place. That's just who we are as human beings. And yes, we have to address.
Could you bring your skills, or would you, if you were asked to bring your skills to Bennington, to help the folks in Bennington resolve the dispute over the Spinelli field?
That's a big one, isn't it?
And
I live in Bennington.
oh, you go, okay. I'm saying, and I was going to, if we had more time, you got a large number over here and a large number over here, and yet the greater good is to do something,
Yeah.
and yet I'm not sure people are listening. I'm not sure, and yet I think your skills could really help the community in that one area, and then and I'm sure if you're successful there, you're going to have
builds.
quite a few other areas to get into.
Yeah.
But I know you, because in your, I think I saw you mentioned the complexity paradigm and how it's influenced your work at conflict resolution, and then you were mentioning your mediation and specifically on in the area of education, and that's why I was hoping that in Long Trail School, the parties would listen to each other and not go to a threat, which we're going to walk out. And you have something similar going on up at Goddard right now, and over in Bellows Falls.
Yeah. Well, we could come, it sounds like we're kind of coming to the close of this particular program, but if you wanted us to come back to talk specifically about how to resolve complex multi-party disputes, that's a whole other, all of these things we talked about today inform how you would move into a process like that. And like you said, that's also built on histories of how to resolve very complex conflicts. But that's a whole other kind of process that could be set up that we could definitely talk about.
Well, they mentioned trust. They mentioned listening, and getting another side of this, the point of view. So even in this short period, these are the tools we want to try to convey in the program without really getting into the issues at Long Trail, the issues over in Belmont. That's a whole other thing.
Well, the issues are, in a way, they're important, obviously, but they're not. The practices are transferable to. I can't think of a issue or conflict that they couldn't be adapted for, and they are fair. That's a word we haven't used, but I think that's a big. Issue is trying to build a process that's fair and that all the voices are, because there are different sides to all these issues, and how do you bring them together in a way where people can listen to each other and then a decision can be crafted from different people's points of view that is at least satisfying to the parties involved. People don't get everything they want, right? But
Absolutely.
they get enough of what they want.
Yeah, and that's where the complexity comes in, because we often think that it's a win-lose
Yes.
or either-or situation, but life really is very rarely like that. It's much more complex. So when, like Alisa said, you can understand that many voices have to participate in coming to any sort of future solution, then you're open in a way to, again, listening to what the possibilities are, because it's not just about power. It's really power sharing
Right.
versus I'm going to win or I'm going to lose.
Right. It's not about winning and losing.
That's
It's
right.
about finding a solution that works for whatever the situation is. So.
Well, there's no question we could easily talk for another half an hour about all of this and drill down into even more areas. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for today. But golly, fascinating to hear from you both. I want to thank Alisa del Tufo and Susan Sgorbati, who work at the Center for Advancement of Public Action at Bennington College. Great to have you both with us, and great to have you with us as well. Hope you found our program interesting today, and you'll want to come back the next time when we have another special guest coming for you. But you'll have to tune in and find out who that's going to be. Anyway, have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you again the next time.